To be, to become, to begin, where the river leans to the sea. To learn, to let go, to love. The world turns endless, turning me. Oh.
How do we stop the blight, our human tendency to defect against the commons for our personal gain? Jim and I explore the micro operating system of human membranes to find a way through. Jim argues for radical transparency, suggesting that every bank account within a community should be world readable to prevent corruption. But transparency eventually hits a floor. Even if it's turtles all the way down, the last turtle still is trust. We look at how to bootstrap that trust through animal level face-to-face connection and the revelation of our own vulnerability. While machines fix themselves with software patches, our human woundedness is the very bridge we use to build deep reciprocity. From the cup of sugar strategy of cultivated independence to scaling governance beyond the Dunbar limit, we investigate how to design environments where it is finally safe to be open. In the current world, the system is forced upon you. In Game B, you own the solution. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Great. So we ended the personal institutional spiral conversation on the question of values and trust. I'd like to explore trust, but we can also go to values route if you prefer that today.
Yeah, let's start with trust. I've been thinking about that a little bit. Megan and I have been talking about it, and it is huge. And after our conversation, I happened to be doing some technical work on the insides of membranes, and what are the things that condition what works and what doesn't work within membranes. And there's a lot of things, and we call it the elements of the micro operating system. But trust itself is huge, right? As it turns out, and in ways that, in a way, I discovered, I think, a way that is actually more or less exponential in its impact, which is a combination of trust plus transparency. If we let's if you don't mind, I'll just dig into this example and see what you think.
Go in. I'll ask my questions later.
Okay, let's imagine a membrane, meaning any Game B container in which some work is being done with some operating system components, such the inside is different than the outside. And so let's imagine a Proto-B, a village, eco-village, right? And that has a medium-sized economy. It's probably going to have an economy on the order of $15 million a year, or something like that. Maybe less, $10 million a year, or something like that. Such entities are always going to be subject to what I call the blight, which is the tendency of individuals to defect against the commons. David Sloan Wilson famously laid out the case that every group gains by solidarity, while individuals often gain by defection from the solidarity. And the tension between those has been a major force in human evolution. The canonical example is, let's say, a band of young warriors leaving the village to go fight out against the other village. We want our village to win, but personally, I want to be at the back of the fucking line. I don't want to be out in the front line. But if everyone's on the back of the refuses to fight, you lose. So, how does that happen? Right? And the way it typically happens is things like culture, right? A person who is a brave warrior gets status in the community. If he doesn't die, he's more likely to have a spouse, reproduce, etc., be celebrated. So you basically the pure game theory says everybody goes to the back and your team loses. So you have to have a way of culturally fighting against that particular variety of blight. More specifically, in human institutions, particularly ones money becomes involved, anything that's invisible, is the tendency to embezzle, to steal, to misallocate, nepotism. Give yourself twice the amount of food the other person does when famine is there. And it is really hard to fight that, particularly as things become more complicated. And I've long advocated for radical transparency as one of the methods to address that. For instance, I would suggest that Game B entities that are big enough to have a formal financial existence, which is not by no means all of them, the bank accounts should be world readable by all members. Right? No secrets about money, period. Right? On the other hand, unless you have a high level of trust, then you can believe. If you don't have trust, then transparency is scary, right? That would I want the U.S. government to see everything I fucking do? Of course they can, but I would not want them to if I could avoid it. I don't trust the motherfucker. And so, to the degree that you can simultaneously increase trust and increase transparency, you have a pretty powerful anti-blight weapon. Of course, you also need some cultural aspects, which is intolerance of the blight. And you think about our modern societies, our ability to tolerate the blight is unbelievably large. Corrupt politicians, or corrupt businesses, just common criminals. Why do we tolerate common criminals? I still don't understand it. Why don't they take them out back and shoot them? I really do think that we're grossly too tolerant of people who are violating the social contract. Now, of course, part of it's trust. Our social contract isn't really trustworthy, so you can understand why some people want to defect. But our level of toleration of the blight is way too high, in my opinion, and that part of the ethos of Game B should be that the blight is an assault on the commons. It's like an infection of the body, or a cancer, a tumor, and we really ought to be thinking about our social operating systems as things that find and eliminate the blight. And trust is something that really helps us do that. And of course, again, the other interesting spin is, to the degree that people believe the blight is under control, they're more likely to trust the entity. So you get this positive feedback loop. Trust equals transparency equals reduction of the blight, which increases trust.
So I could follow that to a point, because you could make the case that transparency can massively support the building of trust, but it can also be the case that it just pushes trust into different places. Meaning, if you decide to be fully transparent about your personal data in the context of a nation state, for example, then you would still have to trust that the people able to see your data do the right thing with it, because unless there's full transparency on every interaction with your data, etc. So either you cascade transparency all the way, or you cut off at a certain point, and at that point you need to replace it with trust. So you likely will not be able to be in full transparency in every single aspect of the of life, meaning you won't ever evade the need for trust. So the question remains, if it is turtles all the way down, the last turtle still is trust, right? So, and the question remains, how do we create trust?
Yeah, there's some truth to that. Though I will say, from the very beginnings of our Game B thinking, I have been of the radical transparency sort, that the win from radical transparency is so large if you're within a container with enough trust. But you're right, at the bottom you still have that bottom turtle. Got to have enough trust to have the transparency, and the transparency increases trust.
Mhm.
But how you bootstrap that problem, I'm not 100% sure. Let's think about that a little bit. Let's say again, let's use a eco village of the Dunbar number is a nice simple test case. What is it that you have to trust within that community with respect to your data or your behaviors or how you deal with each other? What should I be concerned about, say, in the domain of privacy at that level, that context?
Mhm. So if you're looking at the 150 people level of the Dunbar scale, not much will be private for long.
Exactly.
Um,
All you have to do is go to summer camp as a kid, and you quickly realize everybody shits on the street.
so weird behavior will leak into the public domain, even if it's somehow behind closed doors, and at one point it'll leak out enough so that there's no real privacy happening. But what you should be concerned about is whenever there are some modalities where some aggregation of anything, power, material, any levers is concerned, right? Because there's a strong incentive for blight, whatever it is, right? And so if we go through that, there might be some shared pools of money. There might be shared pools of other shared resources. But there might also be, and that's part of the closed door question, groups of people conspiring, right, in some form to influence the others. So there are some modalities that you want to keep observing, where you need trust. Especially, I think the first two you can handle with full transparency. The last one, the behind closed doors option, you typically want to not be fully transparent on what's happening behind closed doors because you don't need everybody to know when you're making love, right?
And there's
Um,
another. I just came up with another case, which is
hmm,
ambiguous information.
mhm,
Say personnel matters, right? I suppose you have
mhm,
a person who you're not sure if they're really working out or not, or whether
mhm,
they're honest
mhm,
or not. You don't want to publicly come forth with a judgment until you have complete information.
mhm,
And so there's a situation where behind closed doors makes perfect sense, even in a pretty radically transparent environment. We don't want to accuse Thomas of stealing the cookies until we can prove it. We think he
mhm,
might have, but we want to investigate before we tarnish his good name.
mhm. Okay, so so let's say trust is inevitable. There is a point where we have to move into trust territory from transparency territory. How do you establish trust? What's the ingredients to proper trust? How's that happen?
Yeah, I would say from a pragmatic perspective, I've long advocated, and I believe it works, is uh, interpersonal, physical, face-to-face relationships
Hmm.
as a probably the speediest means to build trust. I mean, that's what we were evolved to do, essentially, right? Was to interact with people face to face and decide whether we can trust them or not. Of course, we're fooled all the time. Right? The whole existence of con men and such proves that we're not infallible by any means. But we talked about this in the early Game B days a lot, which is the combination of strong links and weak links. Weak links being in those days online communications typically, and this was even before there was very much video. Uh,
Mm.
we can have some cognitive, intellectual conversations that can be extremely impressive, but I don't really know if you're bullshitting me or not at the at the animal level. But if you come and
Hmm.
spend 3 days with me and we go out and have fun and drink and carouse and have true confessions at 2 o'clock in the morning, I decide, is Thomas a person who I can trust at the
Hmm.
animal level? And our animal level is very high dimensional, way higher dimensional than our our linguistic, symbolic
Hmm.
level.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I would strongly counsel that, particularly for small groups, and again, scaling the issue is the bigger problem. Small groups, up to Dunbar, maybe a little bigger, intense face to face, a lot of it. The more, the better.
Hmm.
Is a way to give a substrate for trust to grow upon, or not,
So I
right?
agree. I agree that we have evolved very sophisticated machinery to be able to literally smell out whether we want to trust somebody or not. Um, but still, we can be uh, massively be wrong in that judgment also.
The whole time.
And so for me, what I settle on is if it's a duration during which I can observe that people actually stick to what they say. But the shorthand is if people say what they do and do what they say, and that's consistent across a time where usually there are fluctuations for the incentive structures, for the motivations, right? At one point, it won't be interesting to invest honesty into this relationship because there's no direct gain to be had. And if you test that for long enough, that's when I start trusting.
Let's bounce off on this gain.
Okay.
Very important concept about broader trust than between two people. Let's call it community trust. Um, is the concept of reciprocal but not direct altruism. The idea that I will give to my community, but let's say I give to Thomas, right? Thomas broke his ankle, and so I'm going to hang out with Thomas and help him walk, right? I don't necessarily expect Thomas to help me walk, right? But I
Hmm.
expect Thomas to help somebody in the community when they get in trouble. And one could, and at the Dunbar level, one does run the ledger in one's mind, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
If I'm a reciprocal altruist who don't expect one-to-one immediate return for my actions to the community, but I do expect that people who I help will help other people, and if they don't, I'll stop helping them, basically.
Hmm.
Uh, and so the question is, can that be? And this is some, again, early game B conversation that, in retrospect, maybe had some fairly scary answers, which was, can we create something like what we now call social credit, so
Hmm.
that each of our tendency to be good players of reciprocal altruism can be notified outside a Dunbar level group. Now, at the time, it sounded like a good idea in 2013. With the evolution of things like the Chinese social credit system and things like that, I'm less sure. But
Hmm.
if you could get it to work, you could see the real benefit. Wherever you went in the world, there would be some various believable data points which indicated you either were or were not a good player of the reciprocal altruism game, and how you would be treated when you got to someplace far away would be to some degree mediated by the perception of your behavior over your life.
About 10 years ago, we built something we called the complement graph, which was essentially a little uh, network app that you could uh, pass compliments around to other people, and you would be able to um, pass those compliments on if you receive them. So there's an actual graph between people on. So let's say you're the best person I know to bake bread. And it's very probable that you know somebody who's good at that too. So you could pass that on. And so over time, there would be a web of pointers towards you about things that hold you in high regard of.
That's a nice, simple way to implement something like that. It's not quite the reciprocal altruism; it's more of the attributes and skills graph.
Right, because the reciprocal altruism uh, is very, very hard to capture. That's why we landed on this, because if you're, let's say it's easier to game the reciprocal altruism logging app than the attributes version of it, right? Because
Is my
it
video going away? Let's see here.
yeah, your video is stuck at the moment.
All right, how's that?
Good, you're back.
I had to completely reboot my machine for some reason. My camera had gotten disconnected. What the fuck? We're back.
We're back. So I was just saying what was I saying?
Let's see, where were we? We were trust, social credit. Oh yeah, reciprocal altruism was harder to track
Yeah,
than
and easier to game.
than a skills graph, or easier to gain.
Easy, easier to game and harder to track because it's super subjective, right? Somebody might be perceiving an action of a person as extremely positive or somewhat positive or even negative, while another person might have a completely different perspective on this. Really, really hard to see. But the theory was that if there are attributes assigned to you by other people that are somewhat positive, then there is a high probability that this leaks over into the rest of your behavior, right? Because you're networked, one, because many people are giving you positive attributes, and also because you spend time on developing some skills that then can be assigned positive attributes.
And that in itself is hugely valuable, right?
Hmm.
And maybe a closely related topic, which is status games, which we think is
Hmm.
hugely important. Humans, chimpanzees, bonobos, they play status games, and if you play better status games, you probably have a better society. And I've long advocated that the curation of one's life as an art form ought to
Hmm.
be the status game that we play. And that could include having lots of different skills, or it could be being very
Hmm.
good at a few skills, but somehow you've created the things that you are in a artistic fashion to be a exemplary human that's within your capacity to be. And something like you're talking about could be kind of good at getting at that.
Hmm. It's so interesting that when we entered this domain of conversation, saying, okay, creating one's life as a piece of art, or a good life as an art form, um, something in me tells me, yes, that's absolutely correct. That's a powerful way of seeing it. And then something else tells me, okay, but um, how can I be sure that the objective function is actually something positive, right? You could be really artful at being the most exploitative person,
Absolutely.
but then I go back to um, the question of something I have been protecting and cultivating, which is, I think, linked to being able to trust. So it's not only about this is the other side to trust, right? Being trustworthy is one, but being able to trust requires openness, and I would say a level of naivete, right? I've always been protective of me allowing myself to be naive, even in the light of potential danger, right? And allowing myself the benefit of a doubt, if you will, so that I can trust, even if I might get hurt. And I think that's also a really, really important aspect of this.
Yes, that's huge. That's very interesting. And of course, it's the flip side. And people vary in
Hmm.
both directions, right? Some people
Hmm.
are trustworthy but aren't trusting, which is weird, right? I
Hmm.
can think of people who fit that category, people who are not trustworthy and not trusting. Of course, that makes sense. And the not trustworthy and trusting, which seems bizarre, but probably exists as well. So there are clearly two dimensions that come into play here. And the trusting, yeah, that's an interesting question. How do you, or because there's some optimal, not optimal, but there's a continuum. It's going to be multidimensional, but let's just make it simple, just a single trust dimension. Where are you on your willingness to trust? And this will again comes back to the trustworthiness of the environment you're in, and things like the amount of transparency that's in there, the amount of face-to-face, the various signals you have in which you can reliably decide whether it's safe to trust.
Hmm.
And yeah, so there are attributes of the internals of any membrane which modulate your base level of willingness to trust up or down. And then there is whatever your base level willingness to trust is, which probably can be modified as well. Uh, you know, and
Hmm.
probably automatically self adjusts as you get good feedback from trusting. If you're a person who
Yeah.
trusts and gets burned again and again and again, think of people who manage to somehow have the worst romantic relationships ever, again and again and again. I got a couple of female friends. How could you be so bad choosing guys? Oh my God. But the result is they don't trust men at all, right? And if, on the other hand, those who've had, good relationships, they're much more willing to trust men. So, it's a classic social learning kind of thing. But then there's also probably some, things like how you were raised, right? I definitely know people who were raised in very suspicious households, and their default state is suspicion. And I've known people that were, raised in very open-minded, gregarious families who, trust too much, have been scammed and things of that sort. So the tuning of the base rate and the experiential probably together help read out what our current rate of being willing to trust is in a given environment, and it has to be conditioned with that second one.
And so the experiential is probably hard to control, but the base rate is, because you can provide environments that are safe, physically, emotionally, in every dimension, really, right?
Yeah. And that should go
so
in
if you
design parameter of the membrane. So let's, as we think about what we want in our membrane, we want various forces that steer the base rate of people's trustworthiness to an appropriate level, neither too high nor too low. An appropriate level of willingness to trust
by being safe. So you cannot be the downside of being disappointed by trust, by just being disappointed in trusting somebody, is limited, right? And so having an environment where that is part of the design principle might then ratchet up deeper trust, because you can, as you are more open, you can potentially also present yourself more. You show more of yourself, more of your inherent woundedness, which then offers, which is another modality of creating trust, by the way, right? You can, if you show your own vulnerability, your own shortcomings, your own wounds, you're giving the other person a way to actually exploit you. And if you then see that that's not happening, you can trust more deeply, and the other person knows that you make yourself vulnerable. This is basically the old medieval idea of sharing drinks, right? Swapping liquids, literally, so that everybody gets some of the poison if they're trying to poison each other. So doing that on an emotional level is a really powerful way to quickly build trust.
Yeah, that makes it.
I think this.
You need to take these.
That was my afternoon, morning pillage.
Do you have enough water or anything? Do you need water?
Yeah.
Okay. Is Trent gone?
Yeah.
He didn't say goodbye.
Oh, he's stuck out.
All right. Okay. I'll see you later. I'm going to get my hair cut.
Okay. Pills.
Oh man.
Unbelievable about pills after
It looks like it. You don't need lunch after that.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, yeah. So yes, that is certainly interesting. Let's go one other step though, and this is actually very game B, which is general security in one's life. No doubt, also impacts trust, and it's one of the most insane things about our modern world is we are actually food secure, shelter secure, etc., at unprecedented levels in human history. Right? And yet we feel most people don't have, financial reserves. feel precarious, very precarious, more in the U.S. than in Europe, but particularly in, let's say, the U.S. A lot of people are literally feel like they're 2 weeks away from being homeless. And it would not be true if they were embedded in a decent social network, because there's plenty of surplus in our society. But because our social networks have been destroyed, we feel like we only have to depend upon ourselves. When if we're actually embedded in healthy networks, one of the things I've been saying about Proto-Bs from the beginning, which is if you're a member of Proto-B, you will never be homeless no matter what, right? As long as the Proto-B exists, we will always take you in. If you're a member in good standing, you will always be fed, you'll always have clothes. So baseline insecurity can be deemed to have gone away. And I think that also helps people trust. You can take bigger risks, right? You can't fall as far. You don't feel like you can fall as far. And so that actually may be very, very important, that the movement from having to depend on oneself as an individual for one's security to being able to rely upon your network for security provides a safer basis for trust, because the costs of being wrong are lower. That makes sense.
Total sense. And that's what I meant by feeling safe, right? Having a safe environment, so that you can actually start entering the positive feedback towards trusting. And here's a little anecdote that really shows how that could be built. I was having a mechanic over for my heating system a while ago, and we got chatting, and he shared this story that when he was little, both of his grandmas used to do that independently of one another. From time to time, they would send him over to a neighbor to ask for something small, like some salt,
Yeah, a cup of sugar,
some milk,
is the famous example.
cup of sugar, right? And then he noticed that they had these things at home. They didn't need them. And so he asked, and both grandmas did that, right? Independently of one another. So he asked them, well, why are we doing this? And they said, well, if we don't ask for help, they will also not ask for help.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Right? So maybe part of the cultural framework is the possibility to ask for help.
And that
right?
and that it's just the thing that you do. It's what we do together, and there's no the stigma. It is funny, because when I was a kid growing up in a working class neighborhood, my mother constantly like sending over to get a cup of sugar from the neighbors, happened all the time. Once you become upper middle class, it never happens. Nobody ever comes over and asks you for a cup of sugar. Right? And there's some loss from that. The interdependence is lost. And so you could call it, to take your example, I love the grandmother example, cultivated interdependence. So that you think
as an important design element in the inner part of the membrane of a Proto-B, as a function, enabling function for trust building. Right?
If you assume that, hey, if I need a cup of sugar, somebody will give it to me, then it just adds to your whole sense of security and trust, and it's also a beginning step in reciprocal altruism. It's all good, right?
And you practice it, like in the best way of the play as technology sense that John Vervaeke describes, right? You practice it with cups of sugar, with something that is easy to give and easy to ask for. So you're ready. You are in the practice of already reciprocal trust in a way, or support at least, to be ready when you really need it, when you really depend on it.
I like that. Just the habit. Call it the habit of, the cultivated habit of interdependency on small things that you can then build upon, both at the interpersonal level and just at the skills level. I mean, probably today, a lot of people have a hard time knocking on a neighbor's door and asking to borrow a cup of sugar. But if you did it regularly, it's no big deal.
And I think an intellectual equivalent of that is to say, I don't know.
No, I say that famously all the time. I don't know, and that's like one of the most important phrases. And be willing to say I don't know a lot.
I agree, and I try to cultivate that too. But I noticed that it's not a general thing, right? When I started actively doing that in meetings about 20 years ago, it felt really odd. Or even more, 25 years ago. It felt really odd to do that. But then I noticed that everybody else didn't know either because nobody could explain. And that was a very interesting experience.
You know, I realize everybody is bullshitting everybody else, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And so okay, so on a physical level, we can ask for things, little things that build reciprocity, interdependence, weave a web of habits of mutual support and therefore also trust. On an intellectual level, I can say, I don't know, help me understand, please explain. What's would be an emotional equivalent?
As a not particularly good player of the game of emotions, I'm not sure. I'm not right.
I would so so maybe this one. I think I said wounds and vulnerability earlier, but eh, but 10 years ago when it became apparent to me that one at least extremely possible future would be one in which machines would be better at everything than us humans. I spent a year thinking about what would be one thing that humans are better at than machines. And I just couldn't find anything. It's 9, 10 months thinking, didn't yield anything where I could say, this is where we will be better. So I opened it up in October. I remember the moment and the place very well to find something, even if it's negative. And immediately I knew what it was. It was our vulnerability, because in contrast to a machine can replace a piece, a body part. A machine can roll back to yesterday's data state if it is depressed. If a machine can patch its software if it is in a psychosis, right? Or if it doesn't understand something. So on the cognitive, on the emotional, and on the physical level, machines can just fix themselves. We cannot. And so the inherent vulnerability of the human experience is what might be at the fundamental level of what it means to be a human being. And the flip side to that, the response to our own wounds and vulnerability is love and support and reciprocity. Because we all know that we can only be held in communion with others. It is impossible for us to heal these wounds ourselves. So going back to the question of what's the emotional equivalent, the emotional equivalent would be to reveal my wounds.
Or just assume them, right? Assume that we're all soft and squishy, and that is part of the human condition, and that let's see how we would think about this. Again, as I've mentioned, I'm not much of the emotional kind of guy. I always assume that I'm fucking invulnerable, and anybody fucks with me, I'll kill them, and all that sort of stuff. Of course, I know it's not true intellectually, but emotionally, I've always just been a fucking warrior, afraid of nothing, afraid of nobody, and it's just the way I've been. So,
Yeah, but I don't think that's because you're this hardcore warrior dude. I think it's because you're a 14-year-old boy with a boundless curiosity. That's a different stance. I think that's a completely different stance.
yeah, that's how I feel actually. But yeah, I never just give never really. Anyway, here there. But yeah, the assumption that the fact that we are vulnerable is pretty damn base. It's a pretty base level, isn't it? That's a pretty base
Hmm.
level thing.
Hmm.
If we weren't, then we don't need the interdependence.
Hmm.
If we really were Iron Man in our fighting suit, right? Then we wouldn't need allies. We wouldn't need our network. Wouldn't need our families and our friends. And so, and at least at the moment, our level of vulnerability is relatively static. Now, this is where transhumanism becomes a potential issue. Right?
Hmm.
Suppose
Hmm.
we become much less vulnerable over time. Is that good or bad? Right? One argument would be, "Hey, you're less vulnerable. That's probably good," but it also may cause us to be less human and more
Hmm.
isolated.
Absolutely correct. Yeah, absolutely correct.
Yeah, so
So,
cultivated interdependency, tuning the parameter of interdependency is a design consideration for how we want to live.
and then with all of that, we can safely say that trust building starts with the individual, but can be supported by the community in the form of creating safe spaces physically, emotionally, and intellectually. But building your own foundations on an emotional, physical, and intellectual way that allow you to bounce back from breaches of trust um, makes it more easy for you to open up into trust. And one of those ways is the foundational understanding of the fact that we're actually not that different from each other, that we're all suffering similar wounds, that we're all suffering similar fears and worries, and that just meeting at that point um, might be a really powerful bridge to building trust.
Yeah, I think that can make some sense. And then on the flip side are the experiential and institutional arrangements to scaffold the trusts.
Hmm.
At the Dunbar level, our mental ledger of the favor bank and reciprocal altruism, possibly higher level, more formal signals like your graph thing. Um,
Hmm.
More dangerously, something like the social credit system,
Hmm.
which can see its power, can also see its danger, because if you don't trust the operator of the social credit system, then you could easily see it turning into a nightmare rather than a thing that encourages everybody to do their best.
So, so let's scale it up from away from Dunbar, because ultimately that's what we also need to be able to do properly.
Yeah, that's the
And in when the Constitution in the US was written, people had to ride to Washington on horseback, and so they were actually rooted in some physical environment, and that was their place, and that's where they were from, and that's who they knew, etc. So there was the possibility of actually building localized physical trust, um, so that you could also extend that to the nation state, right? Because you knew at least one person who was part of the wider community who would then go to Washington. Now the game is different, and there's much less trust in that system. Um, Apart from transparency modalities, what would you say are modalities that help us build trust beyond the Dunbar scale.
That's actually interesting. U.S. Constitution is a good example. Some of it may just be quantitative. Originally, the ratio of voters to or constituents to representatives was about 1 in 30,000. And 30,000 is about the size of the town of Stanton, Virginia, where I am today. Do I know everybody in Stanton? No. But do I know 2 nodes away? Do I know everybody? Or 3 nodes away? The answer is yes. And so the connectivity of the graph is high enough, maybe. Today in the United States, the ratio of representatives to citizens is, what the hell is it? There's 435 Congress critters. There's 300 million people. So you're getting close to 700, 800,000 people. So, a city bigger than Zurich. What's a German town of a little under 1 million?
Probably Hamburg, something like that.
Okay, yeah, so that's a big ass city. Or Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's smaller than that. But anyway, a medium-sized big city is about the equivalent of the constituency of a congressman today in the United States. And that's way too big for you to have any reasonable ability to assess whether the leader is corrupt or not. At a city of 25 or 30,000, I believe if I could. At 700,000, I know I can't. And so perhaps some of it is merely architecting the flow of connectivity such that it doesn't fan out too fast. Maybe instead of having one Congress, you have 2 levels, right? You have a level of representatives at the 1 in 10,000 level, and then those fan out to the 1 in 1 million level. So you go, so each 100 of them elects somebody. So all I have to do is have my assessment of my 1 in 10,000 representative, as an example of, and I can actually have a higher level of trust in a 1 in 10,000 representative than I can in a 1 in 1 million representative. But for being able to actually make decisions, I might have to cut it down to 1 in 1 million. So do it in 2 steps, just as an example.
Or in steps, right?
Yeah,
so it doesn't need to be 2, but
Thomas Jefferson originally proposed units of 100, multiples of 100. So that you'd start out with the 100, and then the 10,000, and then the million. And so you have 3 levels to get to 1 million. And then
which makes a lot of sense.
4 levels to get to 100 million. So big country, Germany-sized country. Whether 4 is too many because the information becomes too dilute, entropy increases, I don't know. But there's one way. I would say a priority 1 to 700,000 is way too big. So it may just be something as simple as that. Of course, the other
and that paired with subsidiarity might eliminate some of the problems of the multiple steps, right? Because some of the and also strengthen the idea of subsidiarity.
Yeah, that would be the opposite. You'd have authority at each of those voting levels also, not just just for voting. That each of those levels is responsible for something and has full responsibility under subsidiarity. So more levels
both ways
rather than less levels, and more power at each level. Push the power down. And then in terms of the actual mechanisms of voting, to agree that that's still a good idea. I'm still enamored of liquid democracy as the idea, the old German pirate party thing. It's not been proven, and the pirate party fell apart because it didn't work for them very well, amongst other reasons. But the idea that a citizen needs to be knowledgeable about everything is just not true, not a good idea, not a good basis. If my 3rd grade English teacher, my third grade grammar school teacher, I trust her about educational policy, why wouldn't I give her my education proxy? My uncle, who's retired from the Air Force, give him my defense proxy. Give my wife my nature proxy, so that our gradient of knowledge goes up by who we give our proxies to, so that the people who are actually casting the votes for the representatives, or actually for the legislation itself, if we go that way, is gradually concentrating towards appropriate expertise. That's the other failure mode of democracy, is that most people don't know shit, right? And the decisions they make are very capricious based on how tall the candidate is or how nice their hair is, things of that sort.
Yeah, which requires a certain amount of population so that you have at least sufficient density for the different kinds of knowledge domains that are required for this. So a single party probably isn't enough, because it also attracts a certain kind of people. So it's probably very homogeneous in its talent pool. But applying that over larger scales or larger populations might actually work. And then combining into that sortition as a modality, rather than voting mechanisms, can also massively increase trust, because it decreases the possibility for lobby influence.
And also conspiracy, right?
Yeah, true.
Let's say you had 50% sortition in Congress, that would be really interesting, right? But pretty crazy, but it might actually work great. It worked for the Athenians, right, for a while. And we probably don't have to be 50%, 25% probably plenty. 25% random citizens, truly random citizens, picked and put to the Congress.
Plus a layer of liquidity, and then multiple layers. So in any vector of conversation with any people I have this type of conversation with, we arrive at a similar topology. Now, this is problematic because it is not in the interest of the current modality, right? Blight is strong in current modalities. What could be some clever ways to start experimenting with that?
Again, you can start small. You can start with any organization that you are setting up. Choose a novel governance modality, because it is a legitimate question on whether these ideas will, when actually implemented, produce better results. They seem good in theory, but as we all know, the level of complexity, literal complexity, from the interactions of components to situations makes it that your level of confidence that this will actually be better shouldn't be too high until you try it. So try it at small scale, I think, is the way to do it. You have a babysitting club or something, and manage it according to one of these modalities. See what happens. Particularly the higher stakes stuff, people aren't going to make changes in their fundamental operating system unless there's some evidence that says they should do so, or they're in a terrible crisis, one or the other.
And that's the link back to the last conversation about the personal institutional spiral, because there you also made the point that institutions don't need to be big things, right? The babysitting club, the dinner club, the whatever club, it can be an absolute valid starting point to test this out, which also brings back the important notion of play, right? Play as the modality to explore unknown territory in a safe space. So actually making the point of not betting your entire life on it, but rather starting at a point where you're not going to lose a lot or not anything at all if it fails. In the worst case, you're making a new experience, and that's it. So picking something that expanding the notion of what you would call a Proto-B into any hobby, anytime you're meeting with a group of people that is fitting the definition of institution that we explored last time, which means that it repeats and it has some evolutionary capacity, then you could see that as a proto version of something new,
Yep. Learn a way
and
to
treat it that way.
learn how to live a different way, right? A practice, maybe.
Exactly.
And
Practice.
and I think
Yeah.
from my thinking on all this is we should learn how to be explicit about this, right?
hmm
Actually declare this is a membrane and these are our accords, right? Even if it's very simple, like we talked about the dinner party one, right?
mm
Don't bring Kentucky Fried Chicken to the dinner party.
hmm
That's the first accord. Right? And the second accord, a month later, is home cooked food only. And then a month after that, it's organic food only. And I ran this by my wife. She said, okay, the fourth level is it's food you grew yourself. Right? And maybe you go there, maybe you don't. But you can have be what's the right word? Aware of what you're doing in terms of the internals of your membrane. That you are. And this is the big difference between game A and game B at the feelings level. In that game A is given to you. This is what you get. You do what we want. In game B, we own what we get. And I think that is huge, at least potentially so. And maybe one of the biggest attractors to game B is that the design principle is that you designed it, you own it. You don't like it, change it. That's the theory, of course, of modern representative democracy, but certainly not the practice.
But that's a powerful attractor to invite people into game B.
Exactly. And then that paper,
because that's a longing for everybody, because everybody feels powerless in the current situation.
Yeah, and that's why I put that
while
in that feelings paper, and why it didn't have the full loop that I know you were looking for. Because instead, I said, well, the full loop is actually kind of boring, right? Here's the problem, here's the solution. Okay, here's the problem, here's a class of solutions, but most importantly, you own the solution, right? And it's a different feeling to sense that whatever problems I have, I can do something about them, and probably to some degree, I'm contributing to them. So rather than just taking it as a given, okay, I'm being fucked. All right, either you're fucked with or without Vaseline. That's your only choice.
Yeah, right.
And I think that is very significant. And if we approach, as you say, your hobbies, your relationships, your little startup, you're thinking about, I used to do this all the time. The companies I actually started, I probably started 5 proto companies before I actually started the company. 4 out of the 5 never got funded, never did anything. But we'd meet a couple, 2-3 times a week, small groups, volunteers working on things, different people do different parts of it. And we'd pull it together. Of course, I did it in a game A motherfucker fashion where I owned it, right? Would offer shares to people as incentives, etc. But one could instead do it in a game B fashion, which is let's cooperatively develop this proto idea together. And by the way, let's write down the Constitution. What happens if we decide to do it? And make it collegial and egalitarian. And then as we work and come to the point we do want to launch, we actually already have our values and our structure in place, and we just do that. But being conscious about managing the currents inside the membrane is a big change compared to how we typically deal with it.
Okay. To me, it feels like we're full circle on the trust thing today.
Anything we missed from your perspective? I'm sure we missed a bunch, but
we missed a bunch of things. But I think that if we focused on the trust aspect, I sense we meandered a lot, but I think we we touched on the important elements. I think there's a picture emerging, which I like very much. We could in other conversations we could maybe explore more fundamental values, but also more technological support systems, because I sense that all of the levels that we're talking about could largely benefit from technological support systems. And then because we tend to think about digital technologies a lot, find ways of falling back onto pen and paper if needed, and horses.
And horse, yeah. It's funny. I did go a little thing about 65 years ago. Somebody challenged me. Says, "What happens after the collapse? Where do we rebuild from?"
Mm.
And I spent a couple of weeks thinking about it. And I said, 1875. In 1875, we had moderately efficient steam power, and the tolerances that were in effect could be mostly built locally. It didn't require fancy numeric control machine tools, etc. And so we could probably get back to 1875 fairly quickly. And in 1875, most American agriculture was still horse-drawn by a long shot. Tractors were just beginning to appear in agriculture. 95% of the local traffic was still horse-drawn, and the railroads were used for the heavy stuff, and steamships and things of that sort. But it was still mostly a world of horses.
But if we get things right, we can also leapfrog into a solar punk version of 1875, in which we can grow more than crops for food and clothing, but we can grow other things too, right?
If we can preserve the
heliogenesis.
stack, can we preserve the stack for solar energy? That's an interesting question. It's a pretty tall stack. It's not as...
but I'm not talking about conventional solar in the sense of solar panels, but thinking more in terms of sugar as an energy store, and using natural growth principles in order to have enzymatic processes, proteins that are doing the conversion work that we now would be doing at industrial scales with a lot of fossil input. But rather than doing that on a microscopic scale based on natural principles, if we could build that before the great simplification event, as Nate would describe it, we could leapfrog into a really beautiful version of 1875.
Not bad. I like that. And that's a good thing. And fortunately, well, we don't know, but most of the information should be preserved. And and so it's not like we're bootstrapping from 600 AD or something, or we went from where 60% of Gaul was literate to where the King of France was illiterate. It was a pretty amazing thing to have happened in 130 years. It could happen.
Yeah.
Could happen.